The night air bit through Celeste's thin cloak as she pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the healer's quarters, her hand instinctively cradling her swollen belly. 7 months. 7 months of growing this life inside her, of feeling the flutter of tiny limbs, of whispering promises to a child who might never see the sunrise. The mountain pack's torches cast dancing shadows across the courtyard below, and the voices of the gathering crowd carried up to her like the growl of approaching thunder. "Bring her out!" someone shouted. "Let the elders see the thief's face." Her fingers trembled against the rough fabric of her dress. Thief. The word burned in her chest like swallowed embers. She had dedicated her life to healing, had spent countless nights helping laboring mothers bring their children safely into the world, had mixed poultices and set bones and held the hands of the dying, and now they called her thief. The door behind her crashed open. "There you are." Wulfric's voice slithered through the darkness, and Celeste's wolf, usually so quiet, so submissive, pressed against the inside of her skin with sudden, sharp warning. Her brother stepped into the moonlight, his silver hair gleaming like a blade, his smile the same one he'd worn when they were children, and he'd blamed her for his broken toys. "Did you really think hiding would save you?" "I didn't take anything." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, though her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she feared the baby could feel it. "You know I didn't. The medicine stores were found in your quarters." Wulfric clicked his tongue, circling her like a wolf scenting wounded prey. "Moonbane, Silverleaf, 3 vials of concentrated wolfsbane, enough to poison half the pack." He paused, letting the weight of his lies settle over her. "Enough to sell to our enemies for a fortune. You planted them." The realization crystallized in her mind even as she spoke the words aloud. "Goddess above, Wulfric, you've been selling pack resources for months. I saw the ledgers when I treated Father's illness. The numbers didn't—" His hand closed around her throat before she could finish, slamming her back against the wall hard enough to crack stone. Celeste gasped, her lungs burning, her hands clawing at his wrist even as she fought to protect her belly from the impact. "You saw nothing." His eyes, so like their father's, held nothing but cold calculation. "And soon, you'll say nothing. The elders have already decided. A thief's punishment, death by fire. But first, they'll cut that abomination from your womb and let the flames take it separately. Can't have an innocent soul burning for its mother's crimes." The world narrowed to a single point of crystalline horror. Her baby. They meant to kill her baby. "No." The word tore from her throat, raw and desperate. "No, you can't. The father was a traveling traitor. He's gone. But my child is innocent. I'm innocent." "Innocence is decided by evidence, little sister, and the evidence is damning." Wulfric released her throat, letting her crumple against the wall, gasping. "You have until dawn. Pray to whatever goddess still listens to traitors, though I doubt any will answer." He left her there in the darkness, his footsteps echoing away like the final beats of a dying heart. Celeste pressed her forehead against the cold stone and forced herself to breathe. In, out, in. The baby shifted inside her, a gentle rolling movement that she'd learned to read over these months. Not distress, just awareness. Her child knew something was wrong, could probably feel the flood of fear poison coursing through her mother's blood. She couldn't let them win. Couldn't let Wulfric's greed and cruelty claim 2 more lives to add to whatever dark ledger he kept of his sins. Her mind worked frantically as she pulled herself upright, cataloging her options with the same clinical precision she used when assessing a difficult birth. The healer's quarters had a back window, one that opened onto the steep mountain path leading down toward the northern territories. No one used that path. It was treacherous in daylight and deadly after dark, cutting through unstable cliff faces and crossing the boundary into the Alpha King's domain. The Alpha King's domain. That was near certain death of another kind. King Hadrian Ashford was a legend whispered across the continent, the youngest alpha to ever claim the high throne, the warrior who had united 7 warring packs through blood and battle and sheer brutal will. They said he had killed his own father for the crown. They said his eyes burned like forge fire and his wolf stood tall enough to block out the moon. They said he had no mate, no softness, no mercy for trespassers. But they also said his death was quick. Quick was better than watching her child be cut from her body. Celeste moved before she could talk herself out of it. Her healer's bag still hung by the door. She grabbed it with shaking hands, shoving in whatever supplies she could reach. Dried herbs, bandages, the small knife she used for cutting cord. Her cloak was threadbare, but it would have to be enough. The window groaned as she forced it open, the sound terrifyingly loud in the quiet night. She held her breath, waiting for shouts, for running footsteps, for Wulfric's cruel hand on her shoulder again. Nothing. Only the distant roar of the crowd still calling for her blood. Celeste climbed through the window, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and graceless, and began to descend into darkness. The mountain path was worse than she remembered. Loose stones shifted beneath her feet with every step, threatening to send her tumbling into the black void below. The wind howled through the rocky passes like a living thing, tearing at her cloak and numbing her fingers until she could barely grip the stone outcroppings she used to steady herself. Twice, she nearly fell. Twice, her baby's urgent kicks gave her the strength to catch herself and keep moving. By the time the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the eastern peaks, Celeste had crossed the boundary stone marking the Alpha King's territory. She felt it like a pressure change in her ears, a subtle shift in the very air itself, as if the land recognized her presence and was deciding whether to tolerate it. Her wolf stirred uneasily, instincts screaming that she was trespassing, that she was prey now, that she should turn back. But there was nothing to turn back to. She walked for 3 days. The terrain shifted from treacherous mountain paths to dense northern forest, ancient trees rising around her like silent sentinels, their frost-covered branches catching the weak winter light. She ate what little she'd packed on the first day and foraged after that, finding edible roots, melting snow in her cupped hands to drink, curling against tree trunks at night and shivering until her muscles ached. On the 3rd evening, her legs simply stopped working. Celeste collapsed at the edge of a clearing, her knees hitting the frozen ground with a jolt that sent pain sparking up her spine. The frost-covered grass crunched beneath her weight as she fell forward, barely catching herself on her palms before her belly struck the earth. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one burning her throat, and her vision swam with dark spots that expanded like spilled ink. No, she thought desperately, not yet, not here. My baby needs... The world tilted. She was falling sideways, the cold ground rushing up to meet her cheek, and her last conscious thought was a prayer, not to the moon goddess of her birth pack, but to whatever power might be listening. Please, not my child. Take me if you must, but please, not my child. Darkness claimed her. She didn't feel the patrol wolves approaching, their massive forms emerging from the tree line like shadows given substance. Didn't feel the largest of them shifting, becoming a broad-shouldered man who knelt beside her unconscious form and pressed careful fingers to her throat, feeling for a pulse. Didn't hear his sharp inhale when his hand passed over her rounded belly, or his growled command to the others. Alert the king. Now. The world remained black and silent as they lifted her frozen body and carried her toward the obsidian palace gleaming in the distance. When Celeste finally opened her eyes, she was lying on silk sheets softer than anything she'd ever touched, in a room lit by a roaring fire and dozens of flickering candles. The warmth was almost painful after so long in the cold, seeping into her bones like melted honey, and for one disoriented moment she wondered if she had died after all, if this was the afterworld's reward for a life spent in service to others. Then she saw him. He stood at the foot of her bed like a carving made flesh, all sharp angles and coiled power, his dark hair falling across a face that could have been chiseled from the mountain stone she'd fled. His arms were crossed over a broad chest, his stance perfectly still in the way of predators who had no need to prove their danger. But it was his eyes that trapped her. Amber dark and unreadable, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle with sudden electric awareness. The moment their gazes locked, warmth flooded through her chest like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her breath caught. Her wolf surged forward with a recognition so absolute, so undeniable, that the word echoed through her entire being like a struck bell. Mate, mate, mate. His sharp inhale was audible across the room. His eyes blazed from dark amber to molten gold, the shift so sudden and complete that she knew his wolf had risen to the surface, looking out at her through those burning eyes. A low, possessive growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that should have terrified her, that should have sent her scrambling back against the headboard in desperate self-preservation. Instead, heat pulsed in her chest, spreading through her veins like wildfire. Her hand flew to her swollen belly, protecting the child of another man from this dangerous king who now looked at her like she belonged to him. "Impossible," she whispered. The Alpha King's eyes tracked the movement of her hand, and something flickered across his carved features. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. When he spoke, his voice was rough velvet, scraping against her senses. "What is your name?" She should lie, should give a false name, a false history, should do anything to protect herself and her child from whatever this was. This impossible bond she could feel stretching between them like a golden thread pulled taut. "Celeste," she heard herself say. "Celeste Wildfire." His eyes flashed gold again at the sound of her name, and that possessive growl deepened. "Welcome to my kingdom, Celeste Wildfire." He took one step closer to the bed, then stopped, visibly restraining himself. "I am Hadrian Ashford, and it appears the moon goddess has developed a sense of irony." Celeste's mind rejected what her body already knew. The warmth flooding through her wasn't fever. It was recognition, ancient and undeniable, her wolf pressing against her skin with an urgency she'd never felt before. Every instinct she possessed screamed two contradictory truths: run and stay. Hadrian Ashford remained motionless at the foot of her bed, but she could see the effort that stillness cost him. A muscle jumped in his jaw. His hands, which had been loosely crossed over his chest, now gripped his own forearms with white-knuckled intensity. The gold in his eyes hadn't faded. If anything, it burned brighter, his wolf clearly fighting for control. "You're pregnant," he said, and the words came out fractured, rough, as if speaking required conscious effort. 7 months. Her voice emerged steadier than she expected, though her heart hammered so hard she felt certain he could hear it. "The father was a traveling trader. He's gone. Long gone." Something shifted in Hadrian's expression. Relief, perhaps, though she couldn't imagine why the Alpha King would care about the circumstances of her pregnancy. His nostrils flared, and she realized with sudden burning awareness that he was scenting her, reading every secret her body betrayed through the air between them. "You're starving." Another step closer, and this time he didn't stop himself. "Exhausted. Your wolf is weak. I can barely sense her. And you're carrying a child that isn't—" He cut himself off, jaw tightening. "Isn't yours." Celeste forced herself to meet his gaze directly, refusing to cower even as every survival instinct demanded she bare her throat in submission. "I know what I am, Your Majesty. A trespasser. A packless Omega carrying another man's child. If you're going to execute me, I ask only that you wait until my baby is born. Give her a chance to live, even if I cannot." The growl that tore from Hadrian's chest made the candle flames shudder. "Execute you." He moved then, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides until he stood beside the bed, close enough that she could smell him, pine and wood smoke and something darker, something that made her wolf keen with desperate longing. "You think I would harm my own mate?" The word hit her like a physical blow. Mate. He'd said it aloud, made it real, and now there was no pretending she'd imagined the bond thrumming between them. "I can't be your mate." The words tumbled out, panic rising in her throat. "You're the Alpha King. You need someone strong, someone worthy, someone who isn't—" She gestured helplessly at her swollen belly, at her travel-stained dress, at everything she was and everything she lacked. Hadrian's hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she couldn't, he brushed a strand of tangled hair from her face. The touch sent heat cascading down her spine, her skin prickling with awareness everywhere his fingers passed. "The moon goddess chooses our mates," he said quietly. "Not politics, not convenience, not the expectations of courts and councils." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, achingly gentle. "I have waited 32 years for you, Celeste Wildfire. Do you think I care that you come to me carrying another man's child?" Tears burned behind her eyes, tears she refused to let fall. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, what they accused me of. Then tell me." The simple words undid something in her chest. Not a demand. Not a command wrapped in royal authority. A request, offered with a patience she hadn't expected from a man rumored to have killed his own father. But exhaustion dragged at her limbs, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. The warmth of the room, the softness of the silk beneath her, the impossible safety of his presence, it was all conspiring to pull her back toward unconsciousness. "I'm not a thief," she whispered, the words slurring slightly. "Whatever they told you, whatever messages reached you from the mountain pack, I didn't steal anything. My brother framed me. He's been selling pack resources for months, and I found the ledgers, and he—" Hadrian's hand cupped her cheek, steadying her as she swayed. "Rest now. You're safe here. I swear it on my crown and my wolf. Nothing will harm you within these walls." She wanted to argue, wanted to explain everything, to make him understand before he changed his mind about her. But her body had finally reached its absolute limit, and the darkness was rising again, soft and irresistible. The last thing she felt before sleep claimed her was his hand, warm and steady against her face, and his voice, rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Sleep, little wolf. I'll be here when you wake." Celeste dreamed of fire. She stood at the center of a roaring pyre, flames licking at her skin, but they didn't burn. They welcomed her, wrapping around her like a mother's embrace. Above her, the moon hung full and silver, and a voice whispered words she couldn't quite understand. Something about truth and sacrifice and the price of justice. Then the flames turned cold, and she was running again, running through endless forest with frost cracking beneath her feet, and behind her came the sound of howling. Not pursuit, but mourning, a chorus of wolves crying out for something lost. She woke with a gasp, thrashing against silk sheets, a scream building in her throat. "Easy. You're safe." The voice came from her left, quiet and steady, and when Celeste turned her head she found Hadrian sitting in a chair beside her bed. Not hovering, not reaching for her. Simply present, a book open in his lap, a single candle casting golden light across his sharp features. Her heart hammered against her ribs as reality reasserted itself. The Obsidian Palace, the Alpha King's domain. Her impossible mate watching her with those amber, dark eyes that saw far too much. How long was I asleep? Her voice came out hoarse, scratched raw by the scream she'd swallowed. 6 hours. He didn't close the book, didn't move toward her. Just let her breathe. Let her orient herself. "You cried out twice. Nightmares, I assumed." Celeste pushed herself upright, wincing as her muscles protested. The baby kicked in response to her movement, a sharp jab beneath her ribs, and she pressed her hand to the spot instinctively. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you. You didn't have to stay." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. "You're my mate, Celeste. Where else would I be?" The words hung between them, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to examine. She looked away, taking in the details of the room she'd been too exhausted to notice before. Rich tapestries depicting wolf hunts and moonlit forests. A massive fireplace where embers still glowed. Windows shrouded by velvet curtains the color of dried blood. "Would you like water?" Hadrian asked. "There's a pitcher on the table. And food, when you're ready. The kitchen's prepared broth. I thought something gentle would be easier on your stomach after days of near starvation." Celeste's throat tightened. 3 days of walking through frozen wilderness, eating roots and melting snow, and this fearsome king had thought about broth, had thought about what her depleted body could handle. "Water," she managed. "Please." He rose smoothly, setting the book aside and crossed to a small table near the window. She watched him pour water into a delicate crystal goblet, his movements precise and unhurried. The Alpha King of 7 united packs, fetching water for a packless Omega like a common servant. When he brought it to her, their fingers brushed as she accepted the goblet, and that same warmth sparked between them. A thread of connection she could feel humming beneath her skin. Hadrian's eyes flashed gold for just a moment before he stepped back, retreating to his chair with careful deliberation. "You could have demanded answers," Celeste said quietly, sipping the water and feeling it soothe her parched throat. "Could have interrogated me while I slept, or touched me, or—" She broke off, shaking her head. "Why didn't you?" Hadrian studied her for a long moment before responding. "Because you're terrified. Because you've been running from people who should have protected you. Because the fastest way to destroy a frightened creature is to prove their fears correct." He paused. "I have killed more men than I can count, Celeste. I have burned villages and broken armies and done things that would give you nightmares worse than the ones you already carry. But I have never forced myself on an unwilling woman, and I never will." The raw honesty of his words struck her harder than any declaration of protection could have. He wasn't pretending to be gentle. He was acknowledging exactly what he was: a killer, a conqueror, a man with blood on his hands, and still choosing to treat her with care. "The book," she heard herself say. "What were you reading?" His eyebrows rose slightly at the change of subject, but he answered without hesitation. "A treatise on the healing properties of northern herbs. I thought you might find it useful once you've recovered, unless your skills lie elsewhere." "I'm a midwife." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "Was a midwife. For my birth pack. I helped laboring mothers, mixed poultices, set bones when the main healer was unavailable." Her hand found her belly again. "I know how to bring life into the world. That's all I've ever wanted to do." Something softened in Hadrian's expression, not quite a smile, but close. "Then you'll find no shortage of work here, if you choose to stay. The palace healer is old and overworked, and the surrounding villages could use a midwife who knows what she's doing. If you choose to stay." He was giving her an option. Not demanding, not commanding, offering. Celeste drained the rest of her water and set the goblet on the bedside table. "I should tell you everything. About my brother. About why I was running. Before you decide whether I'm worth the trouble I'll bring to your door. Tomorrow." Hadrian rose, and she noticed for the first time how carefully he moved, keeping distance between them, never crowding her space, letting her feel in control even though they both knew he could close that distance in a heartbeat. "Tonight, you rest. Eat what you can. Heal." He paused at the door, looking back at her with those amber eyes that held far too much understanding. The truth will keep until morning, Celeste. Your body cannot. He left before she could argue, closing the door softly behind him. Celeste sat alone in the fire-lit room, one hand pressed to her belly where her child shifted and kicked, and tried to reconcile the monster of legend with the man who had just spent 6 hours reading beside her bed while she battled nightmares. She couldn't. They didn't fit together. But then again, neither did the idea of the Alpha King as her mate. She was still trying to make sense of it when exhaustion claimed her again, pulling her down into dreamless sleep. 3 days passed. Celeste recovered more quickly than she'd expected, though she suspected that had less to do with her own resilience and more to do with the endless stream of nourishing food that appeared at her door. Rich broths gave way to bread and soft cheese, then to roasted vegetables and tender meat, each meal perfectly calibrated to rebuild her strength without overwhelming her shrunken stomach. Hadrian visited twice a day, morning and evening, but never stayed long, never pushed for more than she was willing to give. He answered her questions about the palace with surprising patience, explained the layout of the grounds, warned her about which corridors led to the council chambers where she might encounter hostile nobles. On the fourth day, Celeste felt strong enough to leave her room. She found her way to the great hall by following the sound of voices, her thin slippers silent on the obsidian floors. The palace was beautiful in a severe way, all sharp angles and dark stone, but there was warmth too. Tapestries that softened the walls, fireplaces that crackled in every corridor, servants who nodded respectfully as she passed. The great hall was another matter entirely. Celeste hesitated at the entrance, taking in the scene before her. A massive table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by men and women in fine clothes who radiated power and hostility in equal measure. At the head of the table sat Hadrian, his crown a simple circlet of black iron that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. She should have turned back, should have retreated to her room and waited for him to come to her. But one of the nobles had already spotted her, and his lip curled with undisguised contempt. "Ah," the man said, loud enough to carry across the hall. "The king's new pet emerges from her den." Silence fell. Celeste felt every eye in the room swing toward her, felt the weight of their judgment pressing against her skin. Her wolf cowered inside her chest, weakened and frightened, offering no help against the hostility radiating from these powerful wolves. "Lord Ashworth?" Hadrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade, and though he didn't raise it, something in his tone made the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "You address my honored guest." Lord Ashworth snorted. "Guest? Is that what we're calling strays now?" He turned to face Celeste fully, his eyes dropping pointedly to her swollen belly. "Another man's leftovers, warming the king's bed because she has nowhere else to go. Tell me, Your Majesty, does she at least earn her keep on her back? Or have you developed a taste for charity cases?" Heat flooded Celeste's face, not embarrassment, but rage. Her wolf stirred weakly, snarling at the insult even though she was too depleted to respond. But she didn't need to. Hadrian rose to his feet, and the movement was so sudden, so violently controlled, that 3 of the nobles at the table flinched backward. He seemed larger somehow, his presence filling the hall until the air itself felt thick with his fury. "Lord Ashworth." Each syllable dripped with ice. "You have served my council for 15 years. In that time, I have tolerated your ambition, your scheming, and your endless attempts to marry your daughters into my bloodline. I tolerated these things because you were useful." He took one step toward the man, then another. Ashworth's face had gone the color of curdled milk. "But you have just spoken words about my mate." The word rang through the hall like a struck bell, and Celeste heard gasps from several nobles. "That cannot be unsaid. You have insulted a woman under my protection, questioned my judgment, and demonstrated that whatever usefulness you once possessed has been outweighed by your stupidity. Your Majesty, you are dismissed from this council." Hadrian's voice never rose, but something in it made Celeste's wolf whimper. You will leave the palace within the hour. Your lands and titles remain yours. I am not a monster who punishes entire families for one man's foolishness. But you will not return to court. Not while I reign, not while she breathes. Lord Ashworth's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. You cannot. For a packless Omega carrying another man's. Go. The word came out as a growl, layered with alpha command that made every wolf in the room, including Celeste's weakened one, want to bare their throat. Now, before I change my mind about letting you keep your tongue along with your lands. The Lord fled. There was no other word for it. He scrambled from his seat and practically ran from the hall, leaving behind a stunned silence that seemed to echo off the obsidian walls. Hadrian turned to face the remaining council members, his eyes still burning with that dangerous gold light. Does anyone else wish to share their opinions about my guest? My mate? No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. Good. He turned to Celeste, and some of the fury in his expression softened. Not much, but enough that she could see the man beneath the monster. My lady, will you join us? We were discussing trade routes with the Eastern Pax, but I find I would value your perspective on certain matters. He was offering her a seat at his council table, offering her respect and status and protection, all in one gesture, in front of every noble who might have thought to follow Ashworth's example. Celeste walked across that endless hall on legs that trembled only slightly and took the empty chair at Hadrian's right hand. She caught his eye as she sat, and something passed between them. Gratitude on her part, fierce satisfaction on his, that didn't require words. Thank you, she thought. Always, his expression seemed to say. And for the first time since she'd fled the mountain pack, Celeste let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found somewhere she belonged. The council session continued for another hour, though Celeste absorbed little of the trade discussions flowing around her. Her mind kept circling back to the weight of what had just happened. Hadrian calling her his mate before the entire court, banishing a powerful lord for insulting her, seating her at his right hand as though she belonged there, as though she had always belonged there. When the final matters were settled and the nobles began filing out, many of them casting curious, calculating glances in her direction, Hadrian leaned close enough that his breath stirred the hair at her temple. You're tired, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. I can see it in the set of your shoulders. I'm fine. You're 7 months pregnant, half-starved, and you've just endured more court politics in one morning than most wolves face in a year. His hand found hers beneath the table, warm and steadying. Let me walk you back to your chambers. She should have refused, should have maintained some distance, some protection for her heart. But her wolf pressed toward him with a need that had nothing to do with exhaustion, and everything to do with the bond thrumming between them like a plucked string. All right. They walked through the obsidian corridors in comfortable silence, Hadrian's hand hovering at the small of her back without quite touching. Celeste found herself noticing things she'd missed in her earlier fog of exhaustion, the way servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, the intricate carvings of wolves and moons decorating the dark stone, the faint scent of pine and snow that seemed to permeate every corner of the palace. It smelled like him, she realized. The whole palace carried traces of his scent. The council meeting, she said as they turned down a quieter hallway. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Call me your mate. Publicly. Before I'd even... She stopped walking, forcing him to turn and face her. Before we'd decided anything. Something flickered in his amber eyes. The bond decided, Celeste, the moment our eyes met. Bonds can be rejected, ignored. You know that as well as I do. Yes. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. They can. Is that what you want? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Her wolf howled denial so loudly she was surprised he couldn't hear it. I don't know what I want, she admitted. 3 days ago, I was running for my life. 4 days ago, my own pack sentenced me to burn. And now you're telling the most powerful nobles in 7 territories that I'm your mate, your queen. And I haven't even... Her voice cracked. I haven't even had time to catch my breath. Hadrian's expression softened. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of tangled hair behind her ear. Then breathe. He said simply, take all the time you need. I've waited 32 years for you, Celeste. I can wait a little longer for you to be ready. Something in her chest loosened at his words, a knot of fear she hadn't even known she was carrying. She was still standing there, trying to find words that wouldn't come, when a messenger came running down the corridor with wild eyes and heaving breath. Your Majesty. The young wolf skidded to a halt, dropping immediately to one knee. Urgent word from the eastern border. A delegation has arrived claiming diplomatic immunity. They say... He swallowed hard, his gaze flicking nervously to Celeste. They say they've come to retrieve a criminal who fled their territory. A thief and a traitor. Ice flooded Celeste's veins. Who leads this delegation? Hadrian's voice had gone dangerously quiet. He calls himself Wulfric Silvermane, Your Majesty. He says he's the rightful heir to the Silvermane holdings in the mountain territories. The messenger's voice dropped. He says the woman is his sister. The world tilted beneath Celeste's feet. She felt her knees buckle, felt Hadrian's arm catch her before she could fall, but everything seemed distant and muffled, as though she were hearing it through deep water. Wulfric was here. Wulfric had found her. Breathe. Hadrian's voice cut through her panic, sharp and commanding. Celeste, look at me. She forced her eyes to focus on his face, on the hard set of his jaw, the fury kindling behind his amber gaze. He cannot touch you here, Hadrian said, each word precise and deliberate. He will not touch you. Do you understand? You don't know him. The words scraped past her frozen throat. You don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me. But before she could answer, before she could explain the years of manipulation and cruelty, the slow poison of a brother who had always seen her as an obstacle to be removed, another servant appeared at the end of the corridor. Your Majesty, the delegation is being held in the receiving hall. Lord Silvermane is insistent. Hadrian's hand tightened on her arm. How many wolves did he bring? 6, Your Majesty, all bearing the Silvermane crest. 6 wolves, not enough to pose a military threat, but more than enough to give weight to a diplomatic demand. Wulfric had always been clever about appearances. He's not here for justice, Celeste said, her voice steadier now that the initial shock was fading. He's here because I'm the only one who can prove what he's done. The ledgers you mentioned? He's been selling pack resources, medicine, weapons, training secrets, to rival territories for months, maybe years. I found the records while I was treating our father. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter shift restlessly beneath her palm. When he realized what I'd seen, he planted the stolen goods in my quarters, called the elders, made sure everyone would believe I was the thief. And your pack believed him over you? The old hurt rose in her chest, bitter and familiar. Wulfric has always been the golden child, the perfect heir. I was just the Omega daughter who refused to mate the wolf he chose for me, who insisted on being a healer instead of breeding stock. She laughed, though there was no humor in it. When he showed them the evidence, they didn't even hesitate. Hadrian was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the messenger still kneeling in the corridor. Tell Lord Silvermane he will be granted an audience tomorrow morning, he said. In the meantime, he and his wolves will be confined to the guest quarters in the East Wing. Post guards at every exit. No one enters or leaves without my explicit permission. Yes, Your Majesty. And send word to my spy master. I want to know everything about this delegation, who they've spoken to, what messages they've sent, whether any gold has changed hands since they crossed into my territory. The messenger scrambled to his feet and disappeared down the corridor at a run. Celeste stared at Hadrian, something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just the novel sensation of someone believing her without demanding proof. You didn't ask if he was telling the truth, she said quietly. About me being a criminal. I didn't need to. Why not? Hadrian turned to face her fully, and for a moment, she saw past the terrifying Alpha King to the man beneath. Lonely, fierce, and utterly certain. Because I felt what you felt through the bond when his name was spoken, he said. Fear, rage, the particular kind of pain that comes from being betrayed by someone who should have protected you. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. I know what a guilty conscience feels like, Celeste. And what I feel from you is something else entirely. She should have pulled away, should have maintained the walls she'd built around herself during the years of isolation and disappointment, the careful distance she'd kept from everyone who might hurt her. Instead, she leaned into his touch, just for a moment, and let herself feel safe. The guest quarters in the East Wing were luxurious enough that Wulfric couldn't claim insult, but far enough from the main palace that he couldn't cause trouble. Celeste knew this because she'd spent the rest of the afternoon studying maps of the palace with Hadrian, learning every corridor and exit, every hidden passage and defensible position. You're preparing for war, she observed, watching him trace potential escape routes with his finger. I'm preparing for contingencies. He looked up, his mouth quirking in something that was almost a smile. I didn't unite 7 warring packs by assuming the best of people. No, you did it with blood and battle, if the stories are true. They are. He didn't flinch from her scrutiny. Does that frighten you? Celeste considered the question seriously. 3 days ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. The Alpha King was a monster, a tyrant, a killer who had torn through opposition like a wolf through sheep. But now she had seen him read quietly by candlelight while she slept, had felt his rage on her behalf when Ashworth spoke his poison, had watched him plan her protection with the same careful attention he gave to matters of state. No, she said finally, it doesn't frighten me. His eyes flared gold for just a moment, and the bond between them hummed with something warm and overwhelming. They ate dinner together in his private chambers, a small, comfortable room rather than the grand hall she'd half expected. The meal was simple by palace standards, though still richer than anything Celeste had eaten in months, and Hadrian made sure her plate stayed full without ever commenting on how much she consumed. Tell me about the baby, he said as she reached for another piece of honeyed bread. If you want to, you don't have to. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about the baby since she'd started running. Not the patrol wolves who found her, not the healers who checked her vital signs, not the servants who brought her meals. Her name is going to be Seren, she said softly. It means star. Her father was... She paused, choosing her words carefully. He was a traveling trader who passed through our territory. He stayed long enough for me to be foolish, and then he left. Do you regret it? Seren? She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of movement beneath. Never. Not for a single moment. She's the best thing I've ever done, even if the circumstances weren't what I would have chosen. Hadrian nodded slowly, something unreadable in his expression. And if I claimed her as mine, gave her my name, my protection, my inheritance? The words hit Celeste like a physical blow. You can't. She's not your blood. Blood is overrated. His voice was matter-of-fact, as though he were discussing trade routes rather than upending every tradition of wolf succession. I've seen enough bloodlines turn rotten from within to know that family is more than genetics. If you become my queen, your daughter becomes my heir, unless you object to that. She opened her mouth, closed it again, found that her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. I don't... Her voice broke. I don't understand why you're doing this. We met 3 days ago. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Hadrian leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. I've known you since the moment our bond recognized itself, and I've been watching you for 3 days, Celeste. I've seen how you carry yourself with dignity even when you're terrified, how you refuse to stay in bed when you could be contributing, how you looked at Ashworth with rage instead of shame when he tried to diminish you. He reached across the table and took her hand. I may not know every detail of your past, but I know who you are. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life learning everything else. The bond between them pulsed with sincerity, with warmth, with a depth of feeling that shouldn't have been possible after such a short time. But mate bonds didn't follow the rules of ordinary connection. They saw beneath masks and pretenses, cut straight to the truth of a person's heart. And Hadrian's heart, she was beginning to understand, was far more tender than his reputation suggested. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. Of trusting again. Of believing this is real and having it taken away. I know. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. We'll take it slow. Whatever pace you need. I meant what I said earlier. I've waited 32 years. I can wait as long as it takes for you to be certain. She studied his face in the firelight. The sharp angles, the dark hair falling across his forehead, the amber eyes that watched her with such careful patience. And if Wulfric tries to take me back? She asked. The patience in his expression hardened to something dangerous. Then Wulfric will learn what happens to those who threaten what's mine. She should have bristled at the possessiveness in his voice. Instead, she felt something ease in her chest, some tension she'd been carrying since the moment the messenger spoke her brother's name. I'm not ready for the marking, she said carefully. Not yet. But I think... She swallowed hard. I think I might be ready to stop running. Hadrian's smile was slow and genuine, transforming the harsh lines of his face into something almost beautiful. That's enough for now, he said. That's more than enough. They talked late into the night, about her healing work, about his lonely childhood in a palace full of politics, about the strange miracle of finding each other when they'd both given up hope. When Celeste finally returned to her chambers, escorted by 2 of Hadrian's most trusted guards, she found that the fear which had gripped her earlier had faded to something manageable. Wulfric was here. Wulfric was dangerous, but she was no longer alone. She was halfway to sleep when the sound reached her, a faint scratching at her window, 3 floors above the ground. Celeste sat up slowly, her heart beginning to pound. The moon was bright enough to show the silhouette pressed against the glass, a wolf in human form, clinging to the stone like a spider, his familiar smile visible even through the distortion. Wulfric. Hello, little sister, he said, his voice muffled but clear. Did you really think a few guards could keep me from what's mine? Celeste's blood turned to ice. Wulfric hung outside her window like a nightmare made flesh, his fingers somehow finding purchase in the smooth obsidian stone, his silver hair whipping in the night wind. His smile, that terrible, familiar smile, stretched wider as he watched her frozen in her bed. The guards were disappointingly easy to avoid, he continued, his voice carrying through the glass. Your Alpha King underestimates how determined I can be when something belongs to me. She forced herself to move, to swing her legs over the side of the bed to stand even as her body screamed warnings. I don't belong to you. I never did. You're a Silvermane. He shifted his grip, and she heard the scrape of claws against stone. Everything you are, everything you have, comes from our bloodline, including whatever power you think you've gained by spreading your legs for the king. The crude words barely registered. Her mind was racing, calculating distances and options. The door was 15 feet away. She could scream, bring the guards running, but Wulfric would be through the window before they arrived. And then, her hand pressed against her belly, against Seren, and something hardened in her chest. "What do you want, Wulfric?" "What I've always wanted." He pressed his palm flat against the glass, and she heard it creak under the pressure. "Our father's holdings, our pack's respect, and your silence." His eyes glittered in the moonlight. "You saw those ledgers. You know what I've been selling, and to whom. If that information reaches the wrong ears, it already has." The words came out steady, stronger than she felt. "I told King Hadrian everything. The medicine, the weapons, the training secrets you've been trading to rival territories. He knows it all." For just a moment, something flickered across Wulfric's face. Fear, perhaps, or fury. Then his smile returned, colder than before. "Then I suppose I have nothing left to lose." The glass shattered. Celeste threw herself backward as Wulfric came through the window in an explosion of glittering shards, his body shifting mid-leap, his wolf's form massive and silver-white in the moonlight. She hit the floor hard, pain lancing through her hip, and rolled desperately as his claws scored the marble where she'd been lying. Somewhere in the corridor, she heard shouting, boots pounding against stone. But Wulfric was already turning, already stalking toward her with his lips pulled back from yellowed fangs. "Get up," she told herself. "Move. Protect Seren." She scrambled to her feet, putting the bed between them, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her wolf surged against her skin, not to fight. She was too weak for that, but to protect, to shield the life growing inside her at any cost. Wulfric shifted back to human form, naked and unconcerned, blocking her path to the door. "You always were stubborn. Mother used to say it would get you killed someday." He cocked his head, listening to the commotion growing closer. Looks like she was right. The door burst open. Hadrian came through first, his eyes blazing gold, his claws already extended. Behind him, a dozen guards flooded into the room, surrounding Wulfric with raised weapons. But it was Hadrian that Celeste couldn't look away from, the rage rolling off him in waves, the bond between them screaming with his fury and his fear. "Celeste?" Her name came out rough, almost broken. "Are you hurt?" "No." She pressed her back against the wall, one hand still protecting her belly. "I'm fine. We're fine." Wulfric laughed. Actually laughed, as though he weren't surrounded by armed wolves ready to tear him apart. How touching. The Alpha King, brought low by an Omega and her bastard child. He spread his arms wide, making no move to defend himself. "Go ahead then. Kill me. Prove to your court that you'd slaughter an unarmed man for the sake of a woman you've known less than a week." "Gladly." Hadrian's voice was ice and iron. "Wait." The word left Celeste's mouth before she could stop it. Every eye in the room turned to her. Hadrian's expression flickered with confusion, with something that might have been hurt, but she held up her hand, asking for just a moment, and stepped forward. "He came here to kill me," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "To silence me before I could tell anyone what I know. But killing him now, like this, it won't prove anything. It won't clear my name. It won't show your people that I'm innocent." Wulfric's smile faltered. "What are you playing at, sister?" She ignored him, keeping her eyes on Hadrian. "There's another way. An old way. The midwife's truth right." Something shifted in the room. A collective intake of breath from the older guards, a flicker of recognition in Hadrian's amber eyes. "I know that right," he said slowly. "It hasn't been invoked in generations. The consequences are absolute. Celeste lifted her chin. Anyone who speaks falsehood under the right burns from within. The truth becomes visible, undeniable. No one can question it afterward. She finally turned to face her brother, meeting his eyes without flinching. I'm willing to submit to it. Is he? For the first time, she saw genuine fear in Wulfric's expression. His composure cracked, just slightly, before he forced it back into place. This is ridiculous. Some archaic ceremony won't change. Then you have nothing to worry about. Celeste's voice was soft, almost gentle. Unless you do. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Then Hadrian stepped forward, his claws retracting, his posture shifting from imminent violence to cold authority. Dawn, he said, the Great Hall will convene a formal tribunal and the truth right will be invoked. His gaze swept over Wulfric with contempt that could have frozen fire. Take him to the cells. If he so much as looks at a window, remove his eyes. The guards moved in, dragging Wulfric away despite his snarled protests. But before they could pull him through the door, he twisted to look at Celeste one last time. You'll regret this, he hissed. Whatever happens tomorrow, you'll regret this. And then he was gone, and Celeste was alone with Hadrian, and her legs finally gave out. He caught her before she hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her with desperate gentleness, pulling her against the warmth of his chest. She could feel his heartbeat racing as fast as her own, could feel the tremor in his hands as he held her. I should have posted more guards. His voice was ragged. I should have kept you closer. Should have. You couldn't have known. She pressed her face into the hollow of his throat, breathing in his scent, pine and smoke and something uniquely him. Wulfric has always been clever. It's how he's survived this long. He won't survive much longer. The words were a growl, vibrating through his chest. Whatever this truth right reveals, I'm going to kill him myself. I know. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. But let me face him first. Let me prove, in front of everyone, that I'm not what he claimed, that I never was. Hadrian's jaw tightened. She could feel his reluctance through the bond, his desperate need to protect her from any more pain. But beneath that, she felt something else. Respect, perhaps. Recognition. You're braver than anyone I've ever met, he said finally. I'm tired of being afraid. She touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. Tomorrow, I stop running. For good. He turned his head to press a kiss into her palm, and the bond between them pulsed with warmth that drove back the lingering cold. The great hall was packed with wolves by the time dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. They lined the walls 3 deep, nobles and servants, warriors and healers, all gathered to witness the first truth rite in living memory. The air crackled with tension, with curiosity, with the electric awareness that something momentous was about to unfold. Celeste stood at the front of the hall, her hand resting on her belly, her chin lifted high. She wore a simple white gown, the color of truth, of innocence, of those with nothing to hide. At her side, Hadrian stood in full ceremonial armor, his crown gleaming dark as midnight, his presence a wall of protection she could feel even without touching him. When the guards brought Wulfric forward, she heard the collective growl that rippled through the assembled wolves. Her brother looked haggard, his silver hair tangled, dark circles beneath his eyes. But his smile was still in place, still sharp with contempt. Let's get this farce over with, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I have a pack to return to. Hadrian didn't respond. Instead, he gestured to the oldest wolf in the hall, a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of obsidian, who stepped forward carrying a silver bowl filled with liquid that shimmered like moonlight. The truth rite requires 3 elements, the elder intoned. The water of the sacred spring, blessed by generations of oath-keepers, the blood of those who seek truth. She drew a small knife from her belt, and the willingness to accept the consequences of deception. Celeste stepped forward first, offering her hand without hesitation. The knife bit into her palm, a quick, bright pain, and she let 3 drops of blood fall into the silver bowl. The liquid rippled, then settled, glowing faintly brighter than before. I, Celeste Wildfire, submit to the truth right. Her voice rang clear through the hall. I invite the sacred flame to judge my words and my heart. A murmur swept through the crowd. Then all eyes turned to Wulfric. He hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough for doubt to flicker across his features. Then he thrust out his hand, letting the elder draw blood, watching his own crimson drops join his sister's in the silver bowl. I, Wulfric Silvermane, submit to the truth right. His voice was steady, but Celeste could see the tension in his jaw. Let's see who burns. The elder lifted the bowl, and the liquid inside began to glow. Tendrils of light rose from its surface like living things, curling around them both, sinking into their skin. Celeste felt warmth spread through her chest. Not unpleasant, just present, waiting. Speak your truth, the elder commanded. Begin with the accusation. Celeste met her brother's eyes. Wulfric accused me of stealing medicine from our pack's stores. He claimed I planned to sell it to our enemies, to poison our own people. He convinced the elders to sentence me to death. She paused, feeling the truth light pulse through her veins. I am innocent of these charges. I have never stolen anything from our pack. I have never betrayed our people. The light flared around her, golden and warm, settling into her skin like a benediction. No burning, no pain, just the radiant confirmation of truth. A gasp rippled through the hall. The accuser will now speak, the elder intoned. Wulfric's jaw tightened. My sister was found with stolen goods in her quarters. The evidence was clear. He screamed. The sound tore through the hall as smoke began to rise from his skin, as the truth light that had blessed Celeste now burned him from within. He fell to his knees, clawing at his own arms, his own face, as wisps of flame licked at his flesh. The medicines were in her quarters because I put them there. The words tore out of him, forced by the relentless pressure of the right. I've been selling pack resources for years. Medicine, weapons, training secrets. To the Eastern Territories, to anyone who would pay. I framed her to cover my crimes. The crowd erupted. Shouts of outrage, growls of fury. The press of bodies as wolves surged forward only to be held back by Hadrian's guards. But Wulfric wasn't done. The right pulled more from him, every lie he'd ever told dragging itself into the light. Our father's illness. I made it worse. Gave him poison in small doses, so Celeste would waste her time treating him while I consolidated power. The inheritance should have been divided, but I convinced the elders she was unfit. She refused to mate the wolf I chose for her, so I decided she was too dangerous to keep alive. He collapsed onto all fours, steam rising from his body, his beautiful silver hair now singed and blackened. When he looked up at Celeste, his eyes were wild with pain and hatred. You were always the favorite, he gasped. Mother's precious healer, father's gentle girl. You didn't deserve any of it. You didn't deserve to survive. Celeste stepped closer, looking down at the ruins of her brother. She felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just a hollow ache where her love for him had once lived, before he'd poisoned it with years of cruelty. I did survive, she said quietly, and now everyone knows the truth. The right's flames guttered and died, leaving Wulfric slumped on the cold stone floor. He was alive, barely. But the marks of his lies were burned into his skin, visible for all to see. Hadrian moved to stand beside her, his hand coming to rest on the small of her back, His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of absolute authority. Wulfric Silvermane, you stand convicted by the sacred right of framing your pregnant sister for crimes you committed, of attempted murder, of treason against your own pack. He paused, letting the words settle over the silent crowd. The penalty is death. Wulfric spat, actual blood this time, and managed to raise his head. She was always weak, he snarled. Our pack is better without her bloodline. Kill me if you want, but you're binding yourself to nothing. An Omega, a midwife, a woman no one wanted. Hadrian's claws extended. But it was Celeste who spoke first, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I wanted myself, she said. I wanted my daughter. And that was always going to be enough. She looked at Hadrian, at this impossible man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen her anyway. But I'm grateful I don't have to do it alone anymore. Hadrian's expression softened, just for a moment. Then he turned back to Wulfric, and all the warmth drained from his face. You said your pack is better without her bloodline. His voice was ice. Then your bloodline ends here. One swift strike, Wulfric Silvermane fell, his last sight his sister standing strong beside the king. The celebration that followed felt distant to Celeste, like watching a play through frosted glass. She accepted congratulations, nodded at declarations of her innocence, let Hadrian's courtiers tell her how brave she'd been, but all she really felt was tired. Bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical, settling into the space where her fear had lived for so long. It wasn't until that evening, when the great hall had emptied and the servants had cleared away the evidence of the tribunal, that she finally allowed herself to feel anything at all. She was standing at the window of Hadrian's private chambers, watching the stars emerge one by one when she heard him approach. His footsteps were nearly silent, a predator's grace, but she felt him through the bond before she heard him. Warmth spreading through her chest, steady, patient, waiting. You should be resting, he said, coming to stand beside her. The healers can wait. She turned to face him, studying the sharp angles of his face in the starlight. I needed to see you, just you. Something flickered in his amber eyes. Celeste, I'm ready. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. She watched his throat work as he swallowed, watched the careful control he'd maintained all day begin to crack. You don't have to, he said roughly. Not tonight. Not because of what happened. I meant what I said. I can wait. I'll wait as long as you need. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw, the edge of his cheekbone. I know you would. That's why I'm not asking you to. She stepped closer, eliminating the space between them, letting him feel the truth of her words through the bond. I've spent my whole life waiting to be good enough for my family's approval, waiting for someone to see me as something other than a healer, a servant, a means to an end. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her touch. You saw me. From the moment I opened my eyes in your palace, you saw exactly who I was. And you wanted me anyway. Hadrian made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a groan. His hands came up to frame her face, his touch impossibly gentle for someone with so much violence written into his history. I've wanted you since the moment I breathed your scent, he admitted, his voice raw. Every instinct screamed that you were mine, that I'd tear apart anyone who threatened you, that I'd burn this whole kingdom to keep you safe. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. It terrified me. I thought, I'd spent my whole life being the monster they needed me to be. I didn't know how to be anything else. You were never a monster to me. She rose on her toes, brushing her lips against his. Soft, questioning. You were exactly what I needed. What Seren needed. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Claim me, Hadrian. Let me claim you back. Make this real. The last thread of his control snapped. His mouth found hers in a kiss that wasn't gentle. It was desperate, consuming. Years of loneliness pouring out between them. She gasped against his lips, and he swallowed the sound, his hand sliding down to grip her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space between them at all. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were pure molten gold. "The bed," he growled. "Now." She went willingly, letting him guide her backward until her knees hit the mattress, letting him lower her down with a care that contrasted sharply with the barely leashed hunger in his expression. He followed her down, bracing himself over her, his dark hair falling forward to frame his face. "I need you to be certain." His voice was strained, control hanging by a thread. "Once I mark you, there's no going back. You'll be my queen. My Luna. Mine in every way that matters." "I know." She reached up to thread her fingers through his hair, pulling him down until their lips were barely apart. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. His mouth traced a path from her lips to her jaw, down the sensitive column of her throat. When he reached the junction of her neck and shoulder, he paused, his breath hot against her skin. "Here," he murmured, pressing his lips to the spot. "This is where I'll mark you, where everyone will see that you're mine." She felt his teeth lengthen, felt the sharp points pressing against her skin without breaking it. The anticipation was almost unbearable, her whole body trembling, the bond between them humming with tension. "Yes," she breathed. "Please." He bit down. Pain lanced through her, bright and sharp and overwhelming. But almost immediately it began to transform, becoming something else entirely. Warmth flooded through the bite, spreading through her veins like liquid fire, and she felt the bond between them snap into something solid and permanent. She could feel him now in a way she hadn't before. His possessiveness, his tenderness, his overwhelming relief at finally claiming what was his. She felt his loneliness, decades of it, dissolving like morning frost. She felt his fear that she would reject him, that he wasn't worthy of softness. She felt his love, bright and fierce and absolute. "Mine," he growled against her skin, licking the wound to seal it. "My mate, my queen, mine." But Celeste wasn't finished. Before he could pull back, she surged upward, her own instincts finally breaking free. Her teeth lengthened, her wolf rising to the surface with a strength she hadn't felt since before her exile. She found the junction of his neck and shoulder, felt him go still beneath her. And she bit. His whole body shuddered. A sound tore from his throat, half growl, half moan, as her mark sank into his flesh. Through the bond, she felt his shock, his overwhelming joy, his absolute surrender to the connection forming between them. No Alpha King in living memory had been marked by his mate. It simply wasn't done. But Celeste had never cared much for tradition. "Yours," she whispered against his skin, tasting the iron salt of his blood. "My mate, my king, yours." The bond completed with a sound she felt rather than heard, a click, a settling, two puzzle pieces finally fitting together. And through it, she felt everything. His heartbeat syncing with hers, his emotions flowing into her and hers into him. A connection so deep and absolute that she knew, with perfect certainty, they would never be truly separate again. Hadrian gathered her into his arms, pulling her against his chest, and for long moments they simply held each other. His hand stroked down her back in soothing patterns. Her fingers traced the edges of her mark on his shoulder. Between them, Seren kicked, once, twice, as if offering her own approval. "She likes you," Celeste murmured. "She has good taste." His voice was rough with emotion. "Like her mother." They lay tangled together as the moon rose outside the window, neither willing to break the perfect peace of the moment. But eventually, Hadrian spoke again. "Tomorrow, I'll announce you formally to the court. Luna Queen Celeste Ashford." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "The mountain pack that exiled you. They'll hear about it within days. They'll probably send apologies, gifts, desperate attempts to curry favor now that you hold real power." Celeste considered this, thought about the pack that had believed lies about her, that had been ready to cut Seren from her womb and burn them both. "Send back silence," she said finally. "They don't deserve my words." Hadrian's arms tightened around her. "As you wish, my queen." 3 months later, Celeste gave birth in the Obsidian Palace, surrounded by healers and guards and a terrified Alpha King who hadn't let go of her hand since the contraction started. "You're crushing my fingers," she informed him between pushes. "I don't care." His face was pale, his eyes wild. "Is this normal? This much pain? Should I kill someone?" "Hadrian." She squeezed his hand back, hard enough to make him wince. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." But she loved him for worrying. Loved that this man who had conquered 7 packs and killed his own enemies with his bare hands was reduced to panic by the sight of his mate in labor. The birth was difficult, but not dangerous. And when Seren finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, announcing her presence to the world with impressive volume, the whole palace seemed to hold its breath. Hadrian held his daughter for the first time with hands that trembled. "She's so small," he whispered. "How is she so small?" "She'll grow." Celeste leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at her but unable to look away from the sight of her mate cradling her child. "Give her a few years. She'll be running this palace." As if in response, Seren opened her eyes. They were gold. Pure, brilliant gold, flashing with the unmistakable gleam of an alpha's power. "Impossible," one of the healers breathed. "She's mine." Hadrian's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Blood or not, she's mine. She'll be treated as my heir, raised as my daughter, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally." Celeste felt tears slide down her cheeks, but for once, they weren't tears of fear or sorrow. Outside the palace, howls of celebration rose into the night sky. The Alpha King had an heir. The Luna Queen had survived her trial. And somewhere, in a clearing not far from the border, the first flowers of spring were beginning to bloom. Seren's tiny hand wrapped around Celeste's finger, holding tight. "Welcome to the family, little star," Celeste whispered. "Welcome home."